Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I'm particularly excited about this talk because it's a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I've lived here in the UAE for, it's hard to believe, 17 years. And the first city I lived in was Abu Dhabi. And I do remember coming here after graduate school and it being a completely different city. And Saadiyat Island was just a place where you would go on a boat with friends and have a barbecue out on one of the sand dunes. And everything was new. And over the last almost 2 decades, I've watched as the city, and also Dubai, where I now live, has completely transformed. And it's transformed not only obviously economically and culturally and socially, but through the urban infrastructure, obviously, and through the architecture. And the architecture and the art and the design are part and parcel of the incredible urban development that we're seeing in Abu Dhabi right now. And I think the city is going through a particular moment. It's really flourishing, and that's the result of decades of state investment and private sector working to build this cultural fabric that we're now witnessing this week. Week has probably been the most busiest, at least I feel, week of Abu Dhabi art, the Abu Dhabi Art Week, that I've ever witnessed. We have museum openings, we have the art fair, we have new galleries, a design fair as well, in the Terminal 1, the Nomad Design Fair. So it's a particular moment, and I think this talk comes at that time because we have an artist, Timo Naasri, who I've followed your work for, again, as long as I've been here, who weaves together beautifully Islamic geometry, mathematics, spirituality to create artworks that you see, for example, the artwork that you see All Light Remembers, that's in the Aldar lounge as you come into this talk, very close by. And his work is very much part, again, of not only sort of interiors, as collectors have bought your work and put them in their homes, but you also do public artwork, which we will talk about today. And Joonathán, Imrey, as the CEO of Aldar, you're working with a company that is very much an institution, a real estate institution of Abu Dhabi, and it's the name that I'm familiar with since I've been living here again, and very much responsible for the urban fabric that creates these spaces where we can dialogue and appreciate new design and new beauty. And so I think what we'd like to talk about today is the purpose and the role of architecture and design and art in creating places for well-being that enrich everyday life, that bring people together, bring different cultures together, and work to create the metropolis that we're seeing today flourish, which is Abu Dhabi. So Timo, the first question I'd love to ask you, when you think about art and public spaces, what do you think of?
This is a tricky one. So as an artist, it has always been quite difficult to think of an artwork and where it is placed, because initially you start in the studio. So you start with an idea that is not necessarily bound to a certain place. Sometimes it is, sometimes you do specific works for places. But in general, you try to develop a general idea that fits your practice, that goes from one idea to the next. And unfortunately, especially, I don't know, in Berlin, in Germany, there's a lot of bad examples of art in public places, because it was always like the little sister of the architecture. So I went, living in Berlin, I've witnessed the changes over the last 40 years in Berlin. So I grew up before the wall came down. And especially when the wall came down and there were all these new opportunities to develop the city, to build a new infrastructure and everything, nobody really cared that much about art in public spaces. And I think this is a very interesting moment now to witness this here in Abu Dhabi, that obviously you have a very different approach. As I mentioned before, it's more like, it feels like you're doing, you're creating places for people. In Berlin, it felt like this hasn't happened. It was more like, okay, we need more office spaces, we need more transportation, whatever. But art never really played a role. And that led to a certain lack in Berlin that we see now in, first of all, not enough money for public art, but also they felt like there's no need. Everybody was in this moment of like, okay, we can do something, we can develop, but they didn't think about communities, the society, the people who live there. It was more like they thought about the corporations, but not about the people. And at the end, architecture always is about people in one way or the other. And it is quite an interesting thing to tackle art in public places, because on one hand, you want to do an artwork that is not an entertainment only. That would be easy, because you see that a lot in lots of places with like what I call the roundabout art. You see that everywhere, and it is like, see, and everybody's laughing already.
I'm just shuffling uncomfortably in my chair.
Too much pressure?
Yeah, a lot of pressure. I'm like, oh, tick that box. Done that.
No, but I think you can do it. Like, it really feels like you think about it, obviously, and that is a big difference. And at the end, when it comes to artworks itself, I mean, everybody picks his favorites, but for me, it's very few pieces in public art that really affect me in a positive way. The first things I would think of is basically Richard Serra works that we have at 2 places in Berlin, and that if the artworks come with a certain kind of mystery about them, they are not like totally self-explaining from the first moment, and you see something it's like, oh, okay, that's kind of clear. Or artworks that reference the place, but in a way that you have to discover. I like to think about that and not getting it all with the first glimpse. I think that is kind of interesting.
No, very interesting, and interesting to hear the sort of the reaction that Berlin hasn't really been necessarily a place for public art, but yet here, in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, I mean, even in Riyadh, although we're going to focus obviously on the UAE, there's this surge, this real effort to create more public art. And Joonathán, how would you, working at Aldar, first of all, what defines a place, sort of the power of a place? How would you kind of define that? And then what is the role that art can play in enhancing that space?
Yeah. Power of place, it's a fascinating, complicated question. I suppose that's essentially what's the job of the developer, though, is, and certainly in the scale that Aldar are working, our job is to create places, and pretty big places, and with the support of heavy government infrastructure, such as the museums on Saadiyat and on Yas, all the entertainment that's been provided. I think it's probably like like a chef, with different ingredients, and obviously those ingredients are. There's different uses, like so retail and office. Sorry to be boring, but different uses have different cadences and timings, and different. The people in them are focused on different things, and it's sort of mixing all of these different ingredients up in a physical space, and then negotiating. Preferences and priorities between public realm, community space, commercial space, residential space, and sort of mixing that up to create, your purpose. Whether it's in the hierarchy of public, whether it's an international destination, whether it's more of a local community. So with that purpose. Just trying to mix up the different uses and quantities and negotiations between those things. I think increasingly, with the drive for sort of wellness and community, have increasingly become important in terms of placemaking, and we're seeing that at a government level as well. And therefore, the allocation of space into public realm and walkable cities and 10-minute and accessibility, and particularly here in the region with sort of heat, so trying to mitigate or extend periods of time for walking outside, etc. That's become a really important part. And then public art, art generally, broad definition from architecture through to the more purposeful public art installations, is an incredibly important layer throughout. And I think there's places. It's interesting. You were expressing a preference for perhaps the more subtle, art that you have to sort of. It's a bit like music collections. You have sort of pop music which instantaneously, satisfies that, as opposed to the ones that take a few listens before you sort of get into it. And we sort of use all art. I've successfully used more popular art where people have selfies against it, and which can be hugely successful in creating sort of destinational, as opposed to more exploratory, historic trails and more, So we use sort of all of it, and unashamedly so, to create different places for different purposes. I'm not sure that was very clear. I'm just thinking that's a terrible answer, but it's quite a complicated. But art is really art and artistry and creativity is an important part of that.
And no, definitely. I think when you're creating an urban development, obviously an urban infrastructure, as we've seen in Abu Dhabi, there's so many different components. So of course the retail component is going to be important, just as the museums are, because these are places where people gather, where they converse. And I think sometimes we forget when we're even walking through a mall that the way that someone has designed the spaces of the mall, making sure that perhaps it doesn't necessarily become overcrowded, or maybe there's a place to pause, really affects the well-being, or even, as we were joking, stress levels of the people in the mall. And if you can stop and look at a beautiful artwork, it doesn't necessarily have to be beautiful. I've been using that word a lot, and I know it's sometimes a complicated word for contemporary art, but it could be a captivating work, something that catches your attention or that makes you pause for a moment and makes you think of something else. I think this, again, this connects to our sense of well-being, to our sense of place.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points there. One is, the benefit is there's a reaction. I always think, there's a reaction to successful art, positive or negative. But I think it's also about the conversation it creates. The conversation you have with someone else about did you see, or discussion about it, and sense of community and bringing people together, and moments of collaboration and discussion. And obviously building communities and pride in place and all those things are about those conversations. Particularly think about the UAE and Abu Dhabi and its sort of role that it's the place where people meet. And I think increasingly. Abu Dhabi now, if we look at the people coming into the country, and certainly in Saadiyat, 85% of the people who are buying apartments here and coming in are from all over the world. And I think those art moments and architecture, provide opportunities of conversation between different cultures.
Yeah, no, definitely, and also just moments, as you said, of there's a sense of dignity. And preservation of culture. I think it's fascinating the way that the UAE has, it's rapidly modernized, and these are very new cities. But at the same time, there is a strong focus on preservation of culture. Local culture, but also wider Arab culture. And Timo, in your work as a contemporary artist, you do incorporate aspects of Islamic geometry, aspects that connect to the wider region. How do you see, I know that you are working on a few public art pieces with Aldar for Abu Dhabi, and I don't know how much you can tell us, but whatever you can, it would be fascinating to know how the works, how are you creating those works? How do they kind of incorporate aspects, signature aspects from your work, but also aspects from the perhaps local culture or the architecture of Abu Dhabi?
Yeah, in fact, I don't know how much I can talk about it.
I think we're in amongst friends.
Okay. Oh, good. Oh, this is why I know all these people. Got it. Yeah, so there's a specific piece I'm doing for Aldar that hopefully is going to be then on display early next year, and this is in this location of the island, of the Sariyat Island, and it was actually, sometimes the starting point is a bit difficult, but then you look at where you are, and suddenly, for me, it was very easy because everything was kind of clicking into place. So the work I'm doing is, first of all, it's based on a navigational instrument that is very ancient, which is called the astrolabe, which is an instrument that has been around for more than 1,200 years, I guess, from the beginning. So it is, first of all, it starts with the question, where am I? Which is, I think, an interesting question here. But it's also some kind of interactive. I think it's going to be a selfie one, I guess, or hopefully. But it's really talking about the position I'm in compared to like a navigational aspect of. It is reflecting the stars to a certain degree. So it's based on an instrument that was meant for measuring your position when you were at sea or at land. And somehow, and also there's the other point that made it quite obvious that this is a good fit is that there are a bunch of these instruments at the Louvre, Abu Dhabi. So if we're lucky enough, we're going to be on that enlarged instrument looking at the Louvre, where this thing is actually also on display. And it is gonna, it's also asking the question of knowledge. So it's a lot about like, when you get closer to that subject, you are kind of surprised on the knowledge that has been there already 1,000 years ago. We lost this kind of knowledge of navigating by the stars, obviously. I mean, how many constellations do you know these days? It comes usually down to 2 or 3 for most of the people. But people back then, and you always have to imagine, I mean, there's this magic for me about it. You have to imagine people 1,000 years ago, they were looking up to the sky. They had no clue what they were seeing. There were these dots, the stars. But we only know since about like around like 1700 that these are suns, that these are actually other suns somewhere. No, that's actually, we discovered that much later. But for them, it must have been this crazy mystery of there are these things that are moving on the night sky. But somehow, if we understand how we can read them, they're going to lead us to where we want to go. I think, for me, this is still like a super magical thing. It's like, I can't wrap my head around it, to be honest. And then, like, what is the sky? So the instrument basically is a projection of the night sky onto a flat surface. That is actually how it starts. So it has so many aspects of science, of the history of navigation, of where am I, that it felt like this could be the perfect fit, and maybe it is. I don't know. I hope.
It's so fascinating to listen to, and I think over the last few years, particularly, maybe it's with a lot of trips to Saudi, there's a lot of artworks I've noticed that do play, particularly obviously by artists from the region, that play off this theme of, you know, the Bedouins' caravans for hundreds and hundreds of years, about thousands, guided them. You know, they found their way across these lands by, you know, by the stars, or obviously there's the notion of the mirage in the desert. So it is still it's still such a fascinating story. And what was coming to me when you were speaking was this connection between the past and the present and the future, and how that connects in a city. So the idea that you're creating an artwork that will link to artworks in the Louvre Abu Dhabi. So that also, you know, and turning to Joonathán now, that creates, again, a dialogue within the architecture and the art within the city, and and that's what I think is so. When you go to these others, when you go to, for example, Paris, you know, Haussmann obviously designed those roads, and the city has been designed in such a way that there's a dialogue within different parts of the city, and then obviously there's the art as well, and so it's lovely to see that that's happening also in Abu Dhabi. What is Saadiyat Grove? How would you define this space where there will be artwork, Joonathán? It's new to me. What will And why? Why is Aldar creating it? Why is it important to create this in Abu Dhabi?
Sadiq Grove is the first. Obviously, all the museums are coming through, and more next week. I think tonight is the sort of official opening of the History Museum, and then public, I think, get to see it next week. Sadiq Grove is the first of the sort of infill project, shall we say. So it's about now creating the civic place in amongst the museums and trying to, to bring that sort of collaboration together. So to link the museums and to sort of infill, obviously, with homes, to build a community around the museums. And that will include, all those ingredients that create, urban life, a civic heart. So there'll be some offices, there'll be retail, residential, there'll be some well-being, some community, obviously we have the Abrahamic house already that provides nourishment for other things. So the Grove itself is a mixed-use building. It will have some retail within it and fine food and leisure as well. And then there'll be some residential. And I think it's what I think, having, I get the benefit of going there regularly to sort of see how progress is going. It's quite an extraordinary space. It's very generous in its sort of public realm gesture, its sort of space and airiness. I think the mix of, how things have been mixed, in 3 dimensions, different uses of space and how they've been mixed together. I think it will create some really interesting spaces that don't exist in Abu Dhabi at the moment. And as it's the first phase, so gradually, we are introducing more different types of residential, different types of retail space, and some exciting new spaces for artists and craftspeople as well will be coming as well, which will complement, the whole artistry of the large and civic scale museums. We'll be bringing that down into a different scale in some of the new districts that we're creating.
That's very exciting. And do you have any information on some other artists as well that you will be commissioning or have already commissioned that we can see?
No.
That was a quick one-word answer.
No, we're celebrating. But
I have to ask the question.
We're celebrating Timo today, so let's do that. There'll be another occasion.
So watch that space. Then perhaps we will find some.
Definitely,
we'll uncover other names in the future.
There's others to come. Yeah.
Okay. Timo, when you are designing art for a public space such as Sadiq Grove, how do you think of the public? Do you think of what people will perceive or what people will feel, or are you focused solely on the artwork within the space?
No, I mean, if it's public art, you have to think of the people, and usually I start with myself, like what would I want to see, or what would I want to experience there? Because public art is, by its name, it's public art. It's not something you do in the studio, but you as a human being yourself, you can think of like, how can I design something, like design a place that does something to me. So I usually start with like, what do I want to see if I would go to a place like that? What would enhance my experience? What would kind of be a nice place where you want to be? That's also something. It's not just something you want to look at, but you want to be there. This is like, actually, this is how communities could gather. I mean, you want to gather at an artwork. And ideally, not only once. It could be like, I like it if an artwork becomes a little bit of a tiny landmark in a place like this. Well, let's meet at the artwork. It's like, it's a nice one. And especially since this artwork will change over the single day with the light that is changing. I hope it'll be a bit of a different experience depending on at which point of the day you come, and even at night. So yeah, this is actually how I approached that.
Yeah, so you're creating with the, obviously with the public in mind.
Yeah.
And what is the process? I think, you create these incredible structures. Right now what's coming to mind, obviously we have one right nearby us, but also the one you did for the Islamic Biennial. I just remember very strongly, it was in, I actually can't remember what section it was in, but it was over the ceiling hanging, and it just complemented the other artworks so well. But it was a big piece, and I remember at the time thinking, what is your creative process? How do you approach such a scale with your work?
Yeah, it's a very difficult one, because you kind of have to wait for the spark to happen. Especially with this one for the Islamic Arts Biennale, which happened this year in Jeddah. It was like, I had no idea at all. Somebody was suggesting something, and then I got a call with the curator, and when he told me what the title of the show is, suddenly certain things fell into place, because it was like, the show is called "And Everything in Between," which is like referring to the earth and the heavens and everything in between. And in my head, just to give like a little insight to that work that we unfortunately not see, but I'll describe it. What was clicking in me was like, I was thinking of a poem, which I usually don't do, but there is a famous Persian poem from the 13th century, which is called "The Conference of the Birds." It's kind of a famous one, and I was thinking like, oh, this could be actually the ideal thing. So the story goes that the birds of the world, they gather to find their king. And the wisest bird comes to them and says like, okay, to find our king, the Simorgh, we have to cross the 7 mountains and the 7 valleys. In the last valley, the king will appear. So they started traveling to the last valley, and in the last valley there was nothing. So 30 birds arrived there, the other one gave up at one point, and in the last valley there was nothing, there was no king. So they crossed, at the end of the valley, they crossed the lake, and they looked down on the reflection of the water, and they saw their own shadow as a flock of birds forming what is the king, and they realized we are all the king. It is us, it's the sum of us that is the king. And I thought that was like actually kind of perfect, because the other things that I worked on is Islamic architecture, and I thought like, can't I create a flock of birds that if you are in a certain position in that space, somehow suddenly becomes something. And that's what I did. I placed 1,200 mirrors on the ceiling, that when you enter the space and you see it from afar, it looks almost like a flock of birds. And when you're right in the center under it, you realize when you look up suddenly that it is building a dome which is based on this mathematical principle, like the Islamic architecture dome called Muqarnas, which is a very mathematical concept of constructing a dome with triangles. So, but there's only this one location when suddenly you realize what it is. So often it is this kind of spark that I'm looking for, and it can be a poem, it can be a story, it can be something that I see or hear and suddenly make a connection, which makes it very, very difficult, because creativity in that sense is not something that you have that much control over. You have to be in the moment to let go, and then if you're lucky it comes to you. But sometimes it's just hard work. You just have to wait and get input from wherever you can. That can be everything, from music to dance to newspaper, and somehow it has to then kind of click.
And then the process for constructing this, how long do these structures take?
Yeah,
to create?
That's the painful part. Yeah, it takes. That's like, then it starts being work. It's like, because I tend to overthink, and I go into like the processes and logistics and how the engineering part, because usually I then really start constructing the things in the computer, like from the sketch to the computer, sitting together with people who know what they do and who can help me. It's like, it's a lot of input, and it's a long process that is usually taking quite a long time. So it's not only getting the idea, which is kind of difficult, but at least once you have the idea, then this could be achieved with just like work on it hard.
I guess it's hard. I guess every structure, every work you create has a different time frame and process and.
Oh yeah, they come in super differently. Like for the Biennale, I had like half a year. For the commission here that I did with Al Advisory, who were like great partners in doing this for Aldar, there was a great team, and we in a very short amount of time we were able to create something that usually, I mean, most of the time I work in my studio more or less on my own. For me, usually that would have taken, I don't know, 5 times as much time as it has now. But given the opportunity to work with them on this project made life super easy. It's like suddenly, it's like, oh my God, now I'm spoiled. I want to have that for every single work. Yeah.
And so you never, sometimes I think we go to the art fair, we visit the new museum, everything looks, there's a performative quality to it because we never know what happens behind the scenes. You know, the whole process itself is laborious, it is a work of art in itself. It's a moment, but it's always fascinating.
It's a tricky thing, especially at an art fair where there's so much like to show and so much on display. And I can only speak for myself, but basically into every single artwork there goes so much work and passion and struggle, to be honest. Like as an artist, it's a constant struggle. That once something is on the wall, even me as a viewer, I pass so many things like, look, okay, got it. Like, I don't even spend a second in, and that is a bit the sad thing about this, about something like an art fair compared to a single work in a public place, because to a certain degree, every artwork deserves a little bit of time from a viewer, and I'm not talking about hours or many minutes, but I mean, you can try that yourself. Go around and say like, okay, I'm gonna have like a bunch of artworks and I'm gonna spend 30 seconds on one and see what happens. These days we only read what's the credit line or something like that, or what's the name, but we don't actually look at the art anymore quite often.
I think, Timo, you've been spending too much time at art fairs.
True.
I certainly spent hours and hours looking at the amazing work on display here. So maybe it's because you're absorbed in it all the time. And
yeah, that makes sense. It's true, probably. Yeah. Okay, so I don't give up yet.
No, don't give up. Don't give up. I mean, I find it hugely inspiring. Yeah.
But I understand both points of view, because I think sometimes or at least me too, as much as I love art and I've been writing about it for so long, we rush through something. And if you gave every artwork even 30 seconds, maybe the perception of the artwork would change, right? Or your experience of it would change. But back to you, Joonathán, I think, the role of public art within a city, within a space, there's this idea of permanence, of something lasting, moving away from the art fair. Obviously we are, thanks to Aldar, thanks to the art, Abu Dhabi Art and Al Circle Avenue, we are here today. But the idea is there's something lasting. Like, obviously nothing is completely permanent in life, things can change, but you're creating something for a long-term future. And that's what Aldar is doing. You are responsible for structures in Abu Dhabi that see there's no end. You're creating them for decades and decades to come. There's a real weight to that.
Yeah. No, there is. No, thank you for loading me up with no. Now, there's obviously, it's a real pleasure to be able to invest. When you're looking at things longer term, you can take a different view of value and your investment. And when you're in the short term, you're looking for short-term returns, and therefore your sight line on value is short. When you've got a longer-term vision, which Aldar have, and building communities and places, for generations, then you can invest in are things that really matter, that deepen the relationship of people with place. And you know that the value, the recovery of the investment that you have made, both in time and money and whatever resources, you have a longer time to recover that value. So your perception of value is different with time. And therefore, you know, as a practitioner, as someone, you know, with the team creating these places, it's wonderful, right? Because we can invest in we have different tools that we can invest in because our horizon for value is different than some other real estate development platforms. And that gives us, you know, the opportunity, but also, you know, the responsibility to do the right thing and understand the different contributions that these investments make. Understanding, you know, the value of commissioning Timo on a public art as opposed to not. There's no, you know, we can have one without, right? People probably wouldn't, you know, you wouldn't know if we didn't do it, but hopefully you will know if we do it. And these things, you know, they're obviously an immense amount of time and energy by Timo, but also, you know, our team as well in getting all of that right and, you know, securing the funds to do it. But you know, so time is, you know, and this sort of responsibility is heavyweight, but it's also an immense, you know, pleasure and privilege to be able to make those investments.
I'm sure you're changing a city, but you're also creating something for society, for your community. You're fostering a sense of community with the people through these structures, as we've mentioned, is so important. I thought I would touch briefly, and I don't know again if this is not a question. I don't know how much you can say yet, but I know Aldar is investing in, you are collecting art. So art is becoming an important part of Aldar. There is an Aldar art collection. I know that obviously it's underway, but you are, you know, investing in local artists also. So that is an important part of your vision right now as a company.
I mean, the sort of our engagement with sort of arts and culture goes, you know, obviously commissioning public pieces, particularly in Saadiyat and our other destinations, is an important component. We also have our own collection, which we have within our own offices and, you know, within our buildings, which, you know, is super important for bringing that into our workplace and stimulating conversations in our staff and, you know, and the people that come into our office, customers, and to see, you know, a depth of our engagement with culture. And then we also bring art into all of our buildings, so our residential buildings, all our hotels. And again, it's not like IKEA, you know, order it. We're spending time on that, and with, you know, with people helping us, Alscal as well on that. So purposeful investment in art and local artists and international on that side. Also, you know, bringing artists in with our school children. We have 40,000 children in our schools, so in engaging it in all different levels. We also work with craftspeople in elements of our buildings. So, you know, whether it's we just went out recently and commissioned some of the large sort of entrance doors to one of our buildings has been crafted by, you know, 5th generation Balinese wood carvings or Japanese sort of timber baths and silver work on hand. So these are craftspeople that we're working with to help them, you know, and also people notice these details in the homes that they buy, when these attentions to details and this investment we're making in, you know, in this generational craftsmanship. I think it matters to people and where they live and their pride in their home and.
Oh, definitely. I think there's. I actually it's my own ignorance, but I didn't realize the depth of what Aldar was, even with craftsmanship, what this investment in community, because in these communities, because I think that's such an important facet to keep alive these days. There's been, in the art world, as people will know, there's been a lot of focus on craftsmen and textiles. I think the Venice Biennial last year, there was tons of artworks with textile and done in collaboration with crafts, with artisans from around the world. So we're in a rapidly changing technological landscape with AI in every part of our life now, which it can be a very positive tool, but at the same time, obviously, it's important to still keep these voices alive. And as you say, people really enjoy being connected to the place where they are in.
And the stories, right?
The story,
Understanding that the door to your home has been crafted by a family who have been doing it for generations and have lovingly done it, rather than it's, not saying it's wrong, but it's not come out of a factory in China, right? It's someone's put their love into this, and I think that makes a difference to how you feel about your home and where you live.
Oh, definitely, and I think it, for years when I'm sure everyone's heard this, but for years, the early years when I lived here, I used to go home to the US or to Italy. Grew up in both places, but people would ask, "Oh, is there art? Is there culture? It just looks like a lot of sky rises in the UAE." And I think obviously that perception has completely changed now. But the fact that such an important company such as Aldar is investing in such details shows that it's not just about another development, not just another skyrise, which obviously people do judge that often from afar when they see pictures of Dubai or Abu Dhabi or other cities in the Gulf. But there is a real focus on maintaining a local culture, craftsmanship. And I think that will bring me to my last question, which I'd love to pose to both of you. I think to wrap it up, again, I really do feel that there's a really particular special energy in Abu Dhabi right now. And I think the population has doubled over the last year from what I've understood. And there's so many art and culture events, new things opening. It's a particular moment. And I would love your thoughts on what is that moment and what defines that moment and what are your experiences of it?
Timo, over to you.
And maybe I'm asking hard questions. I thought it was an uplifting one.
I mean, we could probably have a whole conversation about that. No, for me, it's a super interesting moment, obviously. Also, like in comparison, I'm happy to be a witness of how this all can be approached and how it is approached here. Like when you were just mentioning about craftsmanship, I was thinking like, oh my God, yeah, in Europe this has almost vanished. It's not like you don't even talk about that anymore, right? You wouldn't bring in people from Bali to do a door or anything like that. It's about efficiency. So it is actually a very interesting moment where certain values can be brought back into our everyday lives, which that is something that probably over the last 40, 50 years we've lost because, as I mentioned, it's all about efficiency. It's like, okay, we have to build this in a very short time. What is cost-wise? How can we deal with that? But thinking about the value of arts and crafts again is something that needs to be brought back into our societies. Talking more from a Berlin standpoint on, but otherwise we're going to lose something as a society that to a certain degree is invisible, but is kind of the glue that is bringing everything together.
It may be invisible, but people know, right? You know when you touch it or see it. Yeah. You know.
Yeah, you would if there is still something like that. If we lose all of that, not.
Yeah. I just want to correct it. Not all of our stuff is handmade in Bali, so and we are a large company, so there's quite a lot of factory stuff. So it's just getting the balance right. Two moments that I had the benefit of time while Timo was talking about. The first one is just sort of things that resonate with me in terms of Abu Dhabi right now. The first one, I have the benefit of living in Saadiyat, so just round the corner, which is lovely, which is more than lovely. It was about 3 months ago. When I get home in time, I'll walk around the district, and it's primarily empty at the moment. There's construction ongoing, but there's not many people around in the evenings. And I was walking, just around the street, and the Zayed Museum, the fins, the feathers, were being lit up, and they were testing the lighting. And it was the most beautiful thing. It was just, so I was standing there on my own, like it felt like I'm completely on my own in Saadiyat, nothing. And these completely finished, beautiful Finns it was the most staggering moment of the beauty and the investment, and it just said, what's to come? It just at that moment you're going, this will never be like this again. And just all the millions of people that are going to come and see this, and how exciting it's going to be. And you just had that moment, that glimpse of seeing into the future, and that was special. The other moment is we're working on an island called Fahd Island, which is sort of a wellness island between here and Yas. And the first people that are going to be occupying the island is a school. And we've been working with the Ministry of Education, Department of Education, and with the school to make it a really interesting, bringing wellness and working with neuroscientists around how do you stimulate thinking and help those children in their learning capacity and growing up in social interaction and development of the soul. I'm working with a fabulous creative force, Thomas Heatherwick, as an architect. So I've got a school, a government department, and a brilliant creative mind working on creating a new school for the future on a wellness island. And I'm like, where in the world can this happen? Can you imagine as a child being brought up on a wellness island in this amazing school that's been crafted by government policy and creative, world? It just is staggering. And that's another example of, I think, what Abu Dhabi and the UAE is.
Wow, it's very powerful. It gives me the chills almost because it's such a powerful idea. Thank you so much to both of you, and this has been a fascinating and really insightful conversation. I've learned so much, and I'd love to open the floor to questions if anyone has a question they would like. Noha?
Hi, I'm Norma. I happen to be an architect and urban planner.
Oh dear.
With a flair for art.
It could be a tough question, I can feel it.
And I've done a few art integrations and special projects around the capital. And my question is to you, Jonnathan. You've mentioned Saadiyat Grove. Have you had in mind involving the community on a later stage when Saadiyat Grove is inhabited, so we have like a meaningful community and residents involvement? And my second question is there any room for functional art, like benches, water features, lighting?
So involvement in the community, I think community engagement is what we're all about, really. Obviously, the Grove will be a very public place as well with the retail. But yeah, certainly, engagement with the community is a key part of, we take pride in our, not just the construction and the architecture, but also how we engage. I don't know if you have the benefit of living in an Aldar community at the moment, but hopefully you will, if you did, or people who do, they would speak well of, the activities that, and the engagement. If you mean, are we going to involve the community in the future design or something, I'm not quite sure what level of engagement you were particularly meaning, but certainly in terms of bringing people together and taking guidance from the community as to what sort of activities and things that they want. Definitely, that's absolutely key part of our ongoing relationship, which continues to evolve the community in terms of investments that are made, etc. And your second question. Urban art. No, I still can't remember what the question was, I'm sorry. Functional art, benches, yes. So there will be, of course. Are we involving artists in those? On Saadiyat Grove, no. Are we not on benches? There are some items of functional that we are doing. I think around the landscaping, particularly. There is some art, light installations which have had artist involvement. so we do bring it in. It's a bit like those details that matter. On the functional side, we haven't done too much of that. I've done it before in other places, and it works really well. So, but we haven't on the Grove. That's a future thing for us, absolutely.
Thank you so much to everyone for being with us today, this evening, and yes, look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.